Greetings. If you've seen my channel very much, you know that I generally respond to or make videos about people that I find fairly stupid, distasteful, idiotic. In this video, that's not the case. This is a person I really deeply respect. I would say that I'm a massive fan of his. I'm talking about Michael Brooks from The Majority Report. The Majority Report is Sam Seder's show. Sam Seder used to be on Air America, and I started watching The Majority Report not long after Air America went belly up from mismanagement and a range of other things. So I've been watching The Majority Report for a good solid 10 years or so, and I'm a member and I support them on Patreon. The Majority Report is basically a left-wing progressive show. Sam talks about a whole range of things, news stories. He has on really awesome guests, usually experts in their field, which will talk about everything from voting rights, scientific developments, situations happening overseas and foreign policy, etc., etc. And authors. They're always like really quite interesting interviews. And it's just a very practically minded show and audience, which is what I really like about The Majority Report. Michael Brooks himself has kind of like socialist leanings. He had a really funny interview with Sargon of Akkad a few years back, Karl of Benjamin.
It's important to have a grasp in the ground of what you're talking about.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm convinced I'm talking to someone from the regressive left now, if that's any help to you in identifying exactly what's going on here. You do seem to be under a few misapprehensions.
But go into actual detail.
No. You've just had like a 5-minute monologue. So
go into actual detail, though. Don't do silly ad hominems. Go into actual detail.
I will go into detail. Right?
Okay, go ahead.
So, how big is big enough for you to regard someone as important? That's the first question that comes up, because you think that the regressive left is made up of unimportant plebeians on the internet making ahistorical generalizations, and not just. The thing you have to understand as well is the regressive left is not limited to opinions on Islam. But that is one of the major issues that people are trying to talk about that the regressive left is getting in the way of. But how big would these people need to be? I mean,
what makes me a member of the regressive left?
No.
No, you just threw it out, so I want to know why.
My question.
No, you answer mine first, because you put a direct accusation at me.
No, I asked my question
You put a direct accusation at me.
I don't care. I asked my question
I care.
How big
I care.
I don't care that you care.
I don't care that you don't care that I care. What makes me a part of the regressive left?
You're a regressive. It went on and on. It was an incredibly embarrassing performance, and Michael did a fantastic job there. Michael also does this series of hilarious impressions. He does Nation of Islam Obama, so it's basically like this version of Obama, which is the cliche of what right-wingers say Obama is like. He's always saying, "Kill the white man, Allahu Akbar," and so forth. Don't clip that. He has right-wing Mandela, because Bill O'Reilly said that if Nelson Mandela was alive today, he would be on the right.
The Nelson Mandela Show. The freedom fighter takes to the airwaves.
The struggle against Obamacare was really like what we were doing to reverse apartheid.
He's bold.
The left hates Russia because Russia is a real man country.
He's not afraid to speak his mind.
People have distorted my record all along, but it makes sense. That's what the left does. They lie, they distort, they make your children transgender fags. Back at you in the bottom of the hour.
Occasionally he does an impersonation of Martin Luther King.
And as we all know, as we stand here today in the March of Glory, that acting for the greater good is antithetical to the very enterprise of human life. An enterprise that is, in fact, enterprise. You're using Twitter because someone had an ingenious idea and pursued their self-interest. And now we all get much more easy to access pornography. But some people think socialism is cool. Well, ask Venezuela how they think about that.
So what is this video about? I think I just wanted to use a lot of it just to big up The Majority Report. And Michael also has his own show, TMBS, The Michael Brooks Show, which I have not watched that much. Sorry. I apologize. It's kind of like him in a more progressive socialist mode than when he's on The Majority Report, where he's just kind of goofing a lot and fighting with Sam Harris and his fans. So what's this video about? This is just a criticism of two particular talking points that I've seen Michael kind of partake in somewhat unquestioningly. I just want to explore some of the details of those things. Let's just deal with them. Now, I don't have the videos. I'm just going to recall it. The first one is when a caller called in and said, there's this big conversation about gun control, but the thing we have to be mindful of is that police are going to use these gun control ideas as a way of taking guns away from minorities, because they always target minorities and black people. So we have to be mindful of the fact that it's a white supremacist system, and they will simply use these laws to take gun rights away from black people. And Michael was kind of like, all right, yeah, I see what you mean. We have to be really mindful of that. And I was just thinking, what? Why do you have to be mindful of that? Why is it so important to preserve gun rights for minorities? Now, I understand. Minorities want to protect themselves. But in reality, and I've got some research on this, guns do not make minority people more safe. They're way more likely to be killed, way more likely to be murdered, and just like anybody, probably more liable to kill themselves if they have a gun. So what is this talking point? We have to be so worried about minorities being targeted for their gun rights. Now, I understand just on a matter of principle, a law has to be fair and it has to be even-handed. And if they used it just to target minorities, that would be very unfortunate, because it is, frankly, like a white supremacist system when it comes to policing in America. However, that is not an argument against the policy of having gun control. That's an argument against corrupt and racist policing. And that's always going to be a problem. You don't say, cops always pull over black people way more for having like a broken tail light, and they'll just let a white person go past. Therefore, we shouldn't have laws about broken taillights because they're going to hurt minorities. You don't say cops pull over black people so much more, and then they cite some road rule as to why they did it, so we shouldn't have road rules. No, it's an argument against the racist police and the racist policing. It's not an argument against having laws. I know that's not necessarily the argument that he's making, but that seems to be the idea of why there is this concern. So it just seems like a bit of a non sequitur to say, but if we have these gun laws, it's going to target minorities. Therefore, what? You still have to have laws. They just have to do their best to do it in a fair way. And I know people will say they won't do it in a fair way because it's a racist white supremacist system. Okay, but I think based on how dangerous a gun makes somebody's life, especially someone in a minority, it's not even that bad a right to actually lose. I know people go berserk because they think all rights are equal and equally as important. But in the context of modern society and the way that guns are used and play out in society, I think that's a false comparison. I think that's just bunk. Some of the details of this are shown in articles such as this: the shocking difference in how blacks and whites are killed by guns. Among whites, 77% of gun deaths are suicides, but among black Americans, 82% of gun deaths are homicides. About 41% of white households own guns, compared to just 19% of black households, according to a 2014 Pew survey, and white Americans, 62%, are more likely than black Americans, 54%, to say that gun ownership does more to protect people than endanger personal safety. Those different experiences partly explain their divergent views. Whites, 61%, are nearly twice as likely as blacks, 34%, to say it's more important to protect gun rights than to control gun ownership. I think some viewers will say that this contradicts my point, because they'll say, you see, they want their guns to protect themselves from the guns, which is why it's important to think about minority gun rights. But I think it doesn't, because that ignores the overarching impact of all of these guns in society, which is just a further escalation. And that leads to things like this. From Time magazine, black kids are 10 times more likely than white kids to die from guns, study says. The Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, CDC report published in the journals Pediatrics, analyzed the number of gun-related homicides, suicides, and unintentional deaths and injuries among US children from 2002 to 2014. Black children face the highest rates of gun-related homicides, at 3.5 for nearly every 100,000 researchers found. It's nearly 10 times the rate for white children, at 0.4 for 100,000. In many cases, researchers noted gun-related deaths occur in multi-victim events and involved intimate partner or family conflict. That caller says, it's going to erode gun rights, and this is a really big concern. And Michael's like, yeah, that's a good point. In reality, it makes them 10 times more likely to be killed, intimate partner violence and so forth. And do you really think it's going to help them fight off the police without getting executed, murdered for having a gun, for those gun rights that minorities apparently have? Because I don't think the authorities even recognize their gun rights, because they're too racist for that. Obviously, gun rights are for white people. For black people, they never talk about that. They just say, he had a gun. They never say, he had a gun and he had the right to have that gun. It's the two conflicting threads of the argument that I'm making, and I recognize that those are conflicting. That caller would say, well, if you give them more gun rights, then it wouldn't be seen that way, and they'd just say, oh, that black person has a gun, that's fine. But I would say that's kind of cancelled out by the fact that they're 10 times more likely to die in the literal real world from having guns. And just some theoretical conversation about their rights, I think, is very much secondary to trying to create policies which actually reduce gun violence. And it's very easy and safe to say, as a leftist, I'm real worried about this right based on the vague Second Amendment that everyone should have as many guns as possible or whatever, that will impact black people. But it's harder to say, how do you actually get these guns out of these neighborhoods so that they're not 10 times more likely to be killed? And some people just discount suicides with guns.
Most representatives have no public stance.
Okay, pause it for 1 second. Okay, first of all, 96 people die in our country every day. 66 of those people die from suicide. Okay, 2/3 of all the people who are
Pause it. In other words, 66 people die from shooting themselves. which is in no way contrary to David Hogue's point. But continue.
And here, according to the Giffords Law Center, where guns are prevalent, there are significantly more homicides, particularly gun homicides. Some people completely discount suicide, but I think if you're talking about trans people, for example, having gun rights, this airy-fairy idea, maybe they might protect themselves in a situation, but you're also going to have the counterbalance of mass suicide with guns. Firearms were used in 19,392 suicides in the US in 2010, constituting almost 62% of all gun deaths. Over 50% of all suicides are committed with a firearm, and it doesn't look too good for the white males. White males, about 40% of the US population, accounted for over 80% of firearm suicides in 2010. People of all age groups are significantly more likely to die from unintentional firearm injuries when they live in states with more guns relative to states with fewer guns. On average, states with the highest gun levels had 9 times the rate of unintentional firearm deaths compared to states with the lowest gun levels. We care about black people, and we care about their rights, so guns. So that's all. This is a complicated subject, so there's going to be a lot of room for argument and people finding holes in what I'm saying and finding contradictions. But I think that's basically normal because this is not an easy subject. And I think that's what I'm criticizing Michael Brooks for, is just this caller called in. And I think there was another caller, like a second caller perhaps, that talked about this, and he just was like, yeah, that's great. That's a good point. And I was like, it's not really a very good point. There's a lot to discuss about that in terms of whether guns actually help minorities. And I'm just critiquing that he didn't get into that more. And he didn't really refute that. And I guess because it's a subject that I'm interested in, as you can tell from this video, I was just like, come on, Michael, you can do better. Issue number 2. Alright, the second thing that I'm criticizing is a little bit funny, because in the Majority Report, Michael Brooks recently criticized Sam Harris for having a kind of respectful exchange with somebody and just getting so angry and so irritated and so frustrated by being criticized that he basically just spit the dummy and shut the whole thing down. I'm not saying that's what Michael is doing, but it's just a little bit funny because a caller called in and I can't remember specifically or exactly what they said, but they were talking about toxic masculinity. I think the caller was saying something about the idea being valid or whatever, and Michael was just like, doesn't matter if it's valid, you know, it's a stupid framing. Toxic masculinity sounds dumb. The right can use it against you, like it's a bad thing to say. Now, I sound a bit silly, like I sound quite inarticulate the way that I put it, but it's because there was no real substance to what Michael said. Right-wingers can use it against you, and it's a poor framing, etc. Now, the only reason I had issue with that was not because the phrase toxic masculinity might not sound bad to someone who doesn't know what it means, or care to find out, or has an ideological axe to grind on the topic, but that it's just buying into a right-wing framing to say toxic masculinity is something that we can't say. We can't say that, because it hurts right-wingers in the feels, and then they start appealing to other people about how much it hurts their feelings to not understand what a phrase means. Because they can do that with anything. Remember years ago they tried to turn the phrase liberal into a dirty word, and every time that I turned on Fox News they'd be like, liberals are doing this, liberals are doing that. The fucking liberals again. This is what liberals believe. This is what liberals do. I'm trying to say you shouldn't call yourself a liberal anymore, because if you're a liberal, this is what you believe. And I always just thought, fuck that noise. I am a liberal. I still am. You know, it's still a dirty word to some people further on the left than me, like more socialist people. They're like, you're a liberal. It's disgusting, whatever. I don't care about what they tell me that it means. I know what it means to me to be a liberal. Like, I know what my idea or conception of liberal is, so I don't care about the noise. I don't care about Fox News doing it. I don't care about anarchists doing it. I don't give a shit. I know what it means to me, so I'm a liberal, so that's fine. And I think when you cede that ground to the right wing, you're doing a bit of a disservice to say, our toxic masculinity is what the right wingers say it is to the common people, therefore let's just roll over. That would be like saying liberal is what Fox News says it is. No, it's fine. But how do you know it's fine? Well, I'm going to talk about what it is, so that will help. And a better way to talk about toxic masculinity, I think. I'll do those in reverse order. I think whenever toxic masculinity comes up, the first thing you should say is it's a type of masculinity which is harmful. And the person will say, so you're saying masculinity is harmful? And say, no, this type of masculinity is harmful. And then they'll say, is there a toxic femininity? And I'd say, I don't know about any theory on that or any examples of that, but if you can point to things that women might do which are harmful and could be associated with femininity, yeah, I don't see why not. And they'll say, well, I think it's bad when you say masculinity is toxic. I'm like, again, it's a type of masculinity. And then we'll just go around like this for eternity. It will never end. Ever. Ever. You'll be smacking your head against the wall for the rest of your life. If it was on masculinity, I would also say, yeah, it is bad. It's stupid. Forget about it. It's not. It's a type. And there you go, so that's why Michael would say that it was stupid or bad framing. But it would be the same with anything. If you say socialism is like Stalin killing people. Like, no, actually, it's like socialism's different. Socialism is just the workers owning the means of production and getting together and having representation. Yeah, but Stalin killed millions. Well, still, I think that this is what socialism... Oh, so true socialism hasn't ever been tried then. That's just a talking point, because socialism equals mass murder. No, again, I think it's like workers getting together. You like genocide, you like Stalin, and we'll go on forever. You don't just go, yeah, you're right, I'm gonna throw out everything that I know, and just say that the only thing that is socialism is genocide and stuff, because... you're too stupid to understand what I'm saying. No, you don't do that. So what is toxic masculinity? I'm going to start with the wiki and just expand from there. The term toxic masculinity is used to refer to toxic manifestations of traditional masculinity, e.g. physical violence, in the context of gender studies, and has been adopted in a limited fashion in psychology to describe certain traditional male norms of behavior in the United States and Europe that are associated with harm to society and to men themselves. All of this phrasing is just going to go out the window the moment you get an ideologue talking about this. Toxic manifestations. So that implies that it's not all masculinity. You know, I'm being masculine right now, being a manly man, sitting on my couch. It's not toxic. It's just being a dude, making a video. There are forms of masculinity that are not toxic. That's the point. Certain traditional male norms. Certain norms. Like the norms of, oh, being gay is gross. You know, that guy's weak and effete and feminine. What a homo. That is kind of toxic, like, and that's a thing that's kind of associated with male behavior being kind of homophobic. You know, when I went to school, people were always like, oh, that guy's like gay or something, haha, lol. They wouldn't say lol in real life, but you know what I mean? That would be like kind of toxic masculinity, because like, who cares if someone is gay? It shouldn't matter. If you're chilling out, trading some jokes with your buddies, drinking some beers, playing video games or whatever. Some people don't like video games, would say that is toxic masculinity, but fuck those people. That's just chilling. That's just, it's masculinity. It's fine. You're a dad. You be a good dad. You're a gay dude. You adopt a kid. You're a good dad. It's masculinity. It's fine. But if you say, oh, the woman should do all the child rearing, get in the kitchen, make me a fucking sandwich, you bitch. This is just roleplay, but I'm not like this. It's toxic. It's toxic masculinity. Now, the concept of toxic masculinity is also tied to hegemonic masculinity. Hegemonic means what is the norm in society. So hegemonic masculinity and toxic masculinity are not the same thing, because hegemonic masculinity is not necessarily toxic, it's just the overarching play of masculinity and the overall idea of it in society. And there is a hegemonic femininity as well from researching this, and that is just like, what are the established or thought of norms for women in society. Now, many of these ideas, they weren't come up with, but they were refined greatly and put in one place by an Australian sociologist called R.W. Connell. She wrote what is considered to be a definitive text on masculinity called Masculinities, which she released in 1995, and which had a second edition in 2005, which I haven't read but looks really interesting, so I'd like to. There was an interesting paper by Terry A. Coopers of the Wright Institute called Toxic Masculinity as a Barrier to Mental Health Treatment in Prison, which talked about the stigma of mental health to men in prisons and how they would avoid getting that help. It explores the interaction between hegemonic masculinity and toxic masculinity. It talks about how the desire to not be seen as weak, not be seen as a beta male, so to speak, is harmful to men, and a form of toxic masculinity that prevents them from getting mental health treatment, so it stands between them and a way of achieving more well-being. I know what you're saying. This is not exclusive to men. I agree. I think theory in that area should be expanded. And I don't know why people would be defensive about that. I'm certainly not defensive about the idea that they should find out more about femininity and how that impacts women, but there's a tremendous male prison population, so much of that is going to fall on men. Finally, just in this research I'm looking at, there's an article called Sexism May Be Bad for Men's Mental Health by Peter Hess, which talks about some research. In a meta-analysis of 78 studies comprising 9,453 participants, researchers at Indiana University, Bloomington, and Nanyang Technological University in Singapore found modest but negative associations between a number of masculine norms and mental health outcomes. These masculine social norms included the desire to win, the need for emotional control, risk-taking behavior, violence, dominance, sexual promiscuity, self-reliance, high importance placed on one's job, power over women, disdain for homosexuality, and the pursuit of status. The three norms that researchers research has found to have the most consistent negative effects on men's mental health were self-reliance, pursuit of sexual promiscuity, and power over women. What accounts for it, according to one of the researchers, the norm of self-reliance is increasingly not helpful, he says. You have to often rely on others. There's a gap between what men perceive other men believe or do and what men actually believe or do, says Wong. There's a perception that a man will be seen as less manly for not conforming to gender norms. The irony is that a lot of men feel that way, says Wong, so they're afraid to break away from these norms and end up perpetuating them. So I'm aware that many people will just write this off completely. They won't even think about it. They'll just reflexively say, all of that stuff is not unique to men. What about women? It's a competition. It's a competition between men and women. It's got nothing to do with actually thinking about things that just impact man and that we should be mindful of. It's those damn feminisms. The damn feminisms making men look out to be the worst, and that threatens me as an individual somehow, because I identify with this group, which is men, even though I'm an individual, and then that gets into a lot of confusing group versus individual stuff. We shouldn't base our view of what something means on people who refuse to actually understand that thing. It doesn't matter how many anti-social justice people make videos about how toxic masculinity is demonizing men, and the only thing it's about is just saying that men are evil, etc. It doesn't matter how many times they say that. They could say it for eternity to me, and I'll just say, I know what it is because I've looked into it. It's a form of masculinity. It's not all masculinity. There's nothing wrong with thinking about changing or re-examining or reconsidering the ways that masculinity play out in society, or hegemonic masculinity. Things that matter to me are what are happening in wider society. What are the trends? It's not like somebody doing a personal affront to me based on some group. People should be a lot less sensitive about that kind of crap. I know that people will be pointing out a ton of things they see as contradictions in my arguments, but I feel that it's all fairly consistent. Because if I could summarize what I've been saying about these 2 points to do with Michael Brooks, it's just there is a lot more details, a lot more information to do with these subjects that people will not consider. And I don't think it's constructive to, in Michael's first instance, just say, okay, yeah, sure, great point. Or to just say, you know what, your narrative, which is entirely faulty, obviously toxic masculinity is scary. You just have to do your best to try to communicate what something means, and I've tried to do that. So this is a video of love, not hate. Michael Brooks will continue to be one of my favorite online people. He's hilarious. I'll keep watching the Majority Report, whether he sees this or not. If he does see it and he slags me off because he doesn't like me anymore, I still love you, man. I'm still gonna watch your stuff because you're awesome. Majority Report. Subscribe. Sign up to that. Unsub from me. Unsign up from my Patreon. It's not worth it. You're not getting anything out of it. It's total waste of time. Sign up to Majority Report or the Michael Brooks Show. And that's it. I just want to talk about that. I got no smooth transition into silence. Great video, eh? That you just watched.